You see that participants on my screen or just my screen?
Me, I just see your screen.
Okay.
I don't see any of the participants. I don't even see myself.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. I want to keep letting people in. So I'll just leave that up here as I talk. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and get started? And like I said, we're recording, so hopefully I can let people in if they join, or people will be able to watch afterwards. So I kind of titled this Eat to Perform. I'm going to cover a lot of different topics, and I'll probably ask for some input and feedback as we go here. So we'll go ahead and get started. So my name is Michelle Tegenkamp. I'm a registered dietitian with Headquarters PT. And as I said, this is titled kind of Eat to Perform. We're going to cover a lot of topics. So I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so I said I was going to make you guys do some thinking here. I like to start with throwing out a couple ideas, couple questions for you guys to think about. So if anyone wants to unmute themselves or feel free to throw something in the chat, but a couple questions for you guys to think about. A tomato is a fruit or a vegetable? What do you guys think?
Fruit.
Yes, that was a quick answer. You're right. It's funny because I think most people, and I find myself often thinking of tomatoes as a vegetable, but they are technically a fruit. So next question. Protein has 4 calories per gram and fat has 9. Carbohydrate has 4, 9, or 15. Any thoughts on that? Again, feel free to jump off mute or throw it in the chat. What do you guys think?
15.
4.
4. Okay. Any other guesses? All right, we got everything but 9. So this one is a little tricky, and I'm impressed. Almost everyone answers 15. So we did get a 4 on this one. Carbohydrate actually has 4 calories per gram, similar to protein. And I think this one is a little tricky because we hear so much about carbohydrates and sugar and how bad those are, that I think it's natural for a lot of people to assume that they must have more calories than other macronutrients, but they actually, like protein, only have 4 calories per gram. So, okay, my last question here. The definition of a diet: a food or drink regularly consumed or habitual nourishment, the kind and amount of food prescribed for a person for a special reason, or a regimen of eating and drinking sparingly so as to reduce one's weight. So the definition of a diet, what resonates with you guys? Number 1, number 2, or number 3?
I'd say number 2.
Number 2, okay. Anyone else?
I'm caught between 1 or 2.
Okay, great. Well, you know what? This is actually a bit of a trick question because the answer is all 3. So if you were to, put in your trusty Google, look into it, look at the dictionary, actually all 3 of these come up as a definition for diet. So I always think it's interesting to see what resonates with people. I think too often people think of the word diet, or we hear about diets and we think about weight loss. So I love that that wasn't an answer that anyone gave, right? It's it's the way we eat, really, ideally, is how I'd love for people to think of diet versus a short-term fix to lose weight. That being said, I want to talk a little bit about popular diets, fad diets, diets you guys hear about, things you've tried, things you've had family or friends try. Do any diets come to mind? Again, that you've heard about, tried, families tried, anything pop into your mind?
Atkins diet.
Atkins, yeah. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to give this one to you. All right. This is by no means an exhaustive list, right? But Atkins was mentioned. Keto, similar idea, right? High protein, fat, very low carb. clean eating is a term that's used a lot. Raw diet, intermittent fasting, Weight Watchers, Mediterranean diet, again, that kind of low carb paleo diet is one that we hear more about. The Whole30, again, not an exhaustive list, but these are some that I get asked about or that pop up. Any on here that, or any I missed on here that pop into your guys' mind? Okay. Well, the thing I like to point out about all of these, and I just love this graphic because, again, going back to when I'm asking about the definition of a diet, right, is when we think of these diets, sometimes they are a lifestyle, a way of eating. A lot of times people turn to these, named and types of diets in an effort to lose weight. And so I think, again, I love this graphic in that this talks about a lot of those that I had mentioned, right? So low carb, keto, paleo, intermittent fasting, and it, gives a short description here of what those look like. The big thing though, right, is you look at how it works. And in all of these, when we're talking about weight loss, in some way or form, these diets are creating a calorie deficit. Okay. So a lot of times it's by maybe eliminating a whole food group. Maybe it's restricting the amount of time, but in some way, people are creating a calorie deficit. And so when we see weight loss, we will see sometimes other benefits like cholesterol or blood sugar and other things that go along with that. But the basis of them and why they work is summarized by that same sentence on all of them. So again, I think it's a really good representation of kind of why all those work in terms of a diet. Okay, so, as you guys mentioned, right, though there's other reasons or other ways to think about diet. So whether we're talking about some of these, what we listed, or fad diets, or just the way we eat, where do people get this type of information to maybe form their opinions on what they should or shouldn't have, how they should eat, what's healthy, what's good for people to have? Any thoughts as to where we get this information?
From our doctors or online or from other people, all sources.
Yeah, great. Any other thoughts?
Sometimes there might be a documentary that we can tune into. I just saw one recently, and I'd like to ask you a question about it later in the seminar.
Absolutely. We will have time for questions, but you guys touched on some great ideas there. So, like you said, there's a lot of places to get it. These were mentioned, right? Internet, social media, right? A lot of different things that are promoted. Documentaries, right? And there's lots of them. But again, this is not an exhaustive list. What I will usually say about documentaries, and again, I'm happy to answer a more specific question later on. But what I will tell people about these documentaries is take them for what they are, and I would use them maybe more as entertainment than fact. And that's not to say that there isn't some truthful information, but usually there's a bias behind the production of said documentary. And while the information they're presenting may be accurate, it's also often cherry picked, right? So I was just chatting actually with a client about Game Changers, and we were saying, right, they showed all these benefits for someone that started, going without meat or animal products and going vegan. And, the question I'm sitting there going, well, what were they doing before, right? Are we going from someone that ate no fruits and vegetables and, ate fast food every meal? Or are we going from someone that ate a bunch of whole grains, lean proteins, fruits and veggies, and then went vegan and cut out all the animal products, which resulted in all these health benefits? We don't get that information, right? And again, so some of this information is kind of cherry picked in terms of studies as well. So, that one of these talks about how wheat and gluten is the reason we are all sick and overweight and nobody should eat it. One talks about sugar and how that is the reason we are all sick and overweight and why we shouldn't eat any of that. Several of the others talk about meat and animal products, and that is the reason we are all unhealthy and none of us should eat animal products. So, I say this jokingly a little bit, but again, there's a point of view from whoever is producing these, and that's often what we see in these documentaries. The other one, and this was, oops, I'm gonna mention this one too, and this was already mentioned, is right, physicians, right, which is hopefully good information. I will tell you, physicians don't necessarily get a ton of nutrition education, but hopefully that they're either sharing good information or pointing you in the right direction. Another common one, right, family, friends, coworkers. How many of you have had, again, someone in that realm say, oh, I tried this diet or I tried this food. It is the best. You need to try this, right? Most of us at some point, even I have people tell me that all the time. And what I always like to say is that's the thing about food and diet, right? There is no one diet that works for everybody. And that's what keeps my job really interesting, right? Like what works for you as an individual? What are your goals? Where are you starting? Your age, your gender, your genetics, all these things play into it. So there really is no one diet that fits everybody. However, as I said, ideally we're looking at diet as the way we're eating. So if no one diet fits everyone, what do we do? So I want to talk kind of through some big picture or basic principles that would apply to a lot of people. Again, not everyone to every person, but hopefully general principles that can apply to most of us. So, one thing I like to talk about here is food and nutrition and diet, right? Can affect us both mentally and physically. And I think this is really important, right? Whether we're talking about a professional athlete and their recovery and their fueling for their training competition, a recreational athlete, or, again, the mental side of things of a student or someone at work, right? And how do we best function and fuel ourselves to perform at our best in these areas? So when we are fueling ourselves well, and again, could be a little different for every person, but when we're feeling ourselves well mentally, we'll find we have fewer mood fluctuations. Our ability to concentrate and focus is much better. Reduce symptoms of anxiety, and for most people, an improved ability to handle stress. So when you think about, a stressful situation and you're hungry on top of it, those outside sources can sometimes make handling that stress even harder. Same thing with that anxiety. And on the flip side, when we are when we are not well fueled physically, that can lead to headaches, certainly fatigue, muscle loss, increased risk of illness. Obviously, something we've all dealt with a lot over the last couple of years. But if we're not feeling well, we're not setting our body up to function at its best. So the flip side, what can we do? And so again, some what I call patterns, right? And we'll get in a little more detail as well. But ideally, I'll tell people fueling your body consistently. Okay. Intermittent fasting is an exception to that, where you are purposefully eating within a small window. And so a little different discussion, but generally I will say fueling your body consistently, providing it with nourishment. So avoiding skipping meals, avoiding going really long stretches without eating. Again, our ability to concentrate and perform optimally is going to suffer when we're going those long stretches. Eating at night. I often get a question, is it bad to eat at night? What time should I stop eating? And the long answer is that it depends on the rest of your day, right? Are you needing more fuel? Have you gotten enough in during the day? Are you just craving something, maybe sweet at night? So often what I'll say is if you are hungry and you are eating at night, try and focus on getting in some protein with that snack or with that meal. And then in terms of evening and lateness, I will always tell people be conscious of that caffeine consumption and how late you're consuming that. And again, everyone is different in that I can't drink any caffeine or coffee after about noon, or I feel like I notice it in my sleep. Other people can drink it all night and not notice the difference. So again, knowing yourself on that and being aware of if you're consuming caffeine too late, is that affecting your sleep? Because again, overall health, our sleep is certainly important as well. Okay, so diving a little deeper, this might be a little bit of review, and if so, maybe people can jump in with comments, but anyone want to jump in terms of, we mentioned social media and internet and documentaries and families and friends and physicians. When we're getting this information, what is this information telling us? And, or do you guys have thoughts on what fuels your body for peak performance or for overall health? Any thoughts to that or comments on that idea?
Well, I think one thing would be a mix of fruits and vegetables, particularly of different colors, because they all have a different function, it seems to me. And a lot of it is around really enhancing your gut bacteria rather than taking away from it.
Yeah, great answer. I love fruits and veggies. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but that was a great answer. Any other thoughts? All right, well, let's talk through some of these again, knowing that all of these may not apply to every person, but in general, these are pretty good principles for most of us. So I would say generally eating less processed food. And so when I say that, again, that doesn't mean never eating processed food. That doesn't mean never buying anything that's in a package. But if we can eat things fresh and in their whole form, generally our nutrient content in something like that is going to be higher. Not having to look up the names of things that you find on a label, right? Generally, we can say that's going to be a good thing. And let me tell you, I still have to do that all the time, right? What is this that's in here? So if we can read everything on the label, know what it is, or if there's not a label and it's fresh, even better. So eating less of that more processed food. Eating whole grains versus refined grains. Okay, so when I say whole grains, if you think about grains and as they're farmed, right, and pulled out of the ground, there's three components to most grains. And so when we talk about refined grains, what happens is they strip away 2/3 actually of that grain. And then they might try and add back in some nutrients, whereas that whole grain is left intact and it's higher in nutrients and it's higher in fiber. And so generally we're going to digest that more slowly and we're going to get more benefit from that in terms of vitamins, minerals, and fiber. So that's maybe a whole 100% whole wheat bread versus an enriched wheat bread. That we can talk about brown rice versus white rice, right? Things like oats, things like farro. There's a lot of examples of whole grains out there. And again, including a variety in our diet actually can be a really good thing. As I mentioned, those have more fiber. And so fiber, again, as a general statement, I would say is probably something that maybe most people don't get enough of. And again, some people do get enough and more than enough, but fiber is really important for a couple reasons. So certainly keeping ourselves regular, right? Keeping things moving, it bulks up our stool. And the other really great thing about fiber is it binds cholesterol. And so I find a lot of times if someone comes to me, maybe diagnosed with a health condition, they're thinking, what do I have to cut out? And so if someone comes to me newly with concern about their cholesterol levels, instead of saying, what do we need to cut out? The first thing I say is, what do we need to add in? And fiber is one of those, right? So it can bind that cholesterol, help us excrete it, and actually can be really important in helping bring down our cholesterol levels. The other thing is, again, kind of gut flora was mentioned. And so we sometimes will talk about probiotics and gut flora, but fiber helps feed those probiotics and it's called a prebiotic, right? So again, it is helping with our gut integrity and keeping things and our gut flora healthy and moving well. So foods that, again, have fiber in them, those whole grains we talked about, leafy greens and vegetables, the skin, when we talk about fruits, especially beans and lentils is another really great source of fiber, right? So lots of different areas that we can include that will increase our fiber intake. Drinking plenty of water and fluids. And I'm always talking about this, and I always tell people I am not the best at this. I really have to think about this and be aware of this. Any thoughts or comments as to how much fluid or water we need to consume in a day? Does anyone know what that looks like?
Well, I drink about 120, 140 ounces a day.
Okay. Has anyone ever heard of 8 8-ounce glasses a day? Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yes.
Yeah,
sure.
I feel like that was the common when I, years ago, or when I was growing up, it was like 8-ounce glasses. But again, when you think about that logically, say about 70% of our body is made up of fluid. And so, if I have a, 120-pound person versus a 250-pound person, and about 70% of our body is made up of water. These seem like two very different scenarios. So we actually look at, instead of a set amount, we want to look at it based individually on body weight. And so ideally, if we can get people aiming for about half their body weight in fluid would be the goal. Okay. So a couple thoughts with that is, it doesn't have to be just water, right? So things like tea or sparkling water, flavored waters, those count as well. Coffee, I get asked about a lot. And for a long time, we said coffee didn't count because it is that caffeine is a diuretic. It makes us go to the bathroom. And as is always happening with nutrition, that thought has changed a little bit. And I would say some coffee can count, right? So a couple cups, there's enough fluid in there, you're going to still get some benefit from that. No to those that like to ask, all your fluid from coffee does not count, right? But a little bit of coffee, tea, water, flavored water, sparkling water, right? We can have different sources of that. If you find, oh my gosh, I'm way above that, okay, or oh my gosh, I'm way below that, making incremental changes towards that goal is great, right? That doesn't have, you don't have to go from 0 to 60 overnight, but maybe you start to aim for a third of your body weight and work up to a half of your body weight. The other thing I would always say to keep in mind with this is we absorb fluid or water better when we take it in small amounts. So if you think of like a storm drain, right, and heavy amounts of rain, it can't all drain at one time. It's going to sit there, versus if it's just sprinkling and that's all going to drain. So same idea, we absorb fluid in our large intestine. And if we overwhelm it with a large amount at one time, we're not able to absorb all of that. We'll end up, excreting more of that than if we're kind of sipping all day long. So carrying a water bottle with us, setting an alarm, having a glass of water on the nightstand when we wake up. Those are all things that might help increase our fluid intake. I've seen a lot of really big water bottles around lately that kind of mark your day through the day. Whatever kind of tools or tricks or things help in terms of increasing that fluid intake. Again, hopefully to get towards that half your body weight in ounces. Okay, eating healthy fats. Does anyone know what I'm saying when I say healthy fats, or is there a term that pops into your mind when I say healthy fats, or foods that pop into your mind?
Non-saturated fats, no trans fats. But I eat some almonds each day. I think that's got a decent mix of fats along with other stuff.
Yeah, so you're right. There are lots of different types of fats. There's saturated, there's unsaturated, and even within unsaturated, there's mono or polyunsaturated. And often when we think about healthy fats, a lot of times when you hear that term, people are specifically referring to foods that are high in what we call omega-3 fatty acids. And so foods that are high in omega-3 fatty acids, that is a fatty acid that is less prominent in a typical American diet. And it's a fatty acid that we know also is beneficial in terms of being anti-inflammatory. So there's a lot of health benefits that come with that. Our biggest food source of omega-3 fatty acids is fish, far and away, right? So those fatty fishes, again, by far and away, our highest source of omega-3 fatty acids. There are other foods that will have a little bit in them as well, though. And again, I would kind of throw in that category. So things like nuts and seeds and nut butters, ground flax seeds, chia seeds, things like olive oil, avocados and avocado oil, right? These are foods that we know, again, are anti-inflammatory and are actually great to include in our diet. We also need fats to absorb fat soluble vitamins. There's a lot of reasons we need fat in our diet, but those specifically are great to include lots of those within reason. Okay, spreading protein intake throughout the day. This one I always find interesting too, because we, as I said, kind of common messages that we hear are that, we should eat less carbs, less sugar, and we should eat more protein, more protein, more protein. Okay. And so really the amount of protein we need to meet our needs or or for our bodies to function, I think is a lot less than we conceptually think because of those messages we hear. So it's easier to meet our protein needs, I think, than we realize. But the big thing I find is a lot of times people have like 1 or 2 big servings in a day. And depending on your goals and kind of your daily lifestyle, there are a few reasons why spreading protein intake throughout the day is actually beneficial. So one, if you like to work out or do any type of exercise, if you're in any way trying to lose weight but wanting to maintain muscle mass, our body can only use so much protein at one time for muscle building, muscle repair. So again, whether we're recovering from an activity or trying to maintain our muscle mass while losing weight, that spreading that protein intake out is really beneficial. The other thing to keep in mind is protein has the satiety factor to it, right? So while carbohydrate and protein have the same calories per gram, we digest protein more slowly than we do carbohydrate. And so it helps us feel full longer. And so that can be a benefit for a lot of people as well. One of the things that was mentioned was fruits and vegetables, right? And so again, as a general recommendation, we'll say consuming 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables. Again, this may vary depending on the person, but does 5 to 9 servings sound like a lot or not very much, or in the middle? Any thoughts on that? So I think a big thing to think about is what is a serving of our fruit and vegetable. And so we consider half a cup to be a serving of a fruit and vegetable, except for leafy greens. And then we say a whole cup. Okay. So really this means somewhere maybe between 2.5 to 5 cups of this in a day. Again, depending if you've got leafy greens in there. So usually when we say, we kind of frame it that way, it may still sound like a lot to people, but maybe not as overwhelming. And, as was pointed out, having a good variety in terms of types and colors and those kinds of things, you're right. I can't name every vitamin and mineral and every fruit and vegetable or food out there for that matter, right? Because they all definitely vary. And so having a good mixture of food on your plate and different colors of foods on your plate is a good way to think, all right, I'm getting some different vitamins and minerals and nutrients. So I loved that comment. The last thing on here is to eat seasonally and locally when possible. And I know that's not always possible. But again, an example of that might be if you can get strawberries from your farmer's market in the summer or from a local farm versus, or your garden for that matter, right? Versus, strawberries that get shipped out from South America in the middle of winter. Okay. So we know that if they get picked and shipped up from way down south, one, they can't be picked at their peak freshness, right? Because then by the time they get up here, they've gone bad. So they're picked earlier. They haven't had a chance to fully ripen. Their nutrient profile is not going to be as great as, walking into your backyard or farmer's market or whatever that looks like and being able to grab something fresh. So again, obviously environmental impacts of that as well. But when possible, trying to eat seasonally, locally gives us a good excuse and a good chance to try different foods as well. Any thoughts, comments, questions on any of that?
I think it's a great list.
Great. I would like to hear that. Thank you. Okay. In addition to that, even bigger picture, right? Let's think even bigger picture. And we touched on this a little bit. I think getting good variety in our diet. Again, different vitamins, different benefits from different types of foods. So getting some good variety in our diet is, I think, hugely important. Moderation, and I like this point for a couple reasons, or I like to point out for a couple reasons. Moderation looks different for different people. Right. And so again, depending on where you are, depending on your age, depending on your goals, moderation is going to look very different. But I say that because I want people to be eating in a way that is sustainable. Right. So it's really important to me that I'm never telling someone you can never have fill in the blank. I would rather say, think about how much and how often and how that relates to, your overall health and what your goals are. Right. So, again, the goal is to be able to eat in a way that's sustainable and not feel like I can never have something, because I will tell you often when we tell ourselves we can't have something, that's what we think about having, right? So getting a good variety, eating in moderation, whatever that looks like for you. And again, that can be very different. And then hopefully going back to that idea of the definition of a diet. And again, you guys picking out the way that we eat, right? So our diet is the way that we eat, and it's sustainable, and we can do that for the long term. I think that is a great goal for all of us to have. Sometimes easier said than done, but a great goal. Okay, so I wanted to touch on a few kind of topics here. So we're talking about kind of these principles of food, but how do we actually get food in our body, right? And so, when we're going to eat or we're going to eat meals, I kind of am putting things in three categories, right? So of course, we have to have the food, but we either are needing to make food, we're either needing to get food that's already made, and that might be having it delivered, or it might be eating out. So I kind of want to touch on all those topics. For those that do cook at home, right? Maybe some tips and thoughts, right, on that and on meal planning, especially with the cost of food these days and it going up so incredibly high. I think, how do we plan so we're not throwing out and wasting a bunch of food, right? You may find, I like to cook once a week. I like to cook every day. We don't like to eat out. And of course, there's lots of in between. But I would always say start with choosing a shopping day and then making that list, right? We know when we go into the grocery store hungry or without a list, we're either buying a lot of things we don't need, things that catch our eye, or we're coming home and going, oh, I'm going to make dinner and I forgot that ingredient. Okay. So this might be once a week for some people. It might be twice a week. It might be every day. It might be once a month. Again, different for everybody. But when does that make sense for you and your family to do that shopping? Have a list. I used to do it on paper and would always forget the paper. So now I do it on my phone. But when you're going to make that list, thinking about on the meal planning side, if you are going to cook at home, all right, well, where am I getting these recipes from? So I think having a place to save them, it might be a binder, it might be Pinterest, it might be recipe books and you mark those. But what does my week look like or the time frame that I'm shopping for? Okay. So, whether it's kids or work or other commitments, all right, I know I can cook a meal on this day and this day, or I know that this day has to be a crock pot meal, or this needs to be a takeout day, right? Kind of looking at your week. And for a lot of people, it changes week to week. But when you go to plan your meals, having that in mind, again, when we talk about food waste and being realistic, planning a big elaborate meal when you realize you have a work dinner that day, right? Or a work meeting that keeps you late, is probably not realistic. So looking at your weeks and then going back to those recipes and thinking, okay, these make sense, right? Having go-tos, maybe easy ones, and then making sure you write down those ingredients you need. For those that like cooking, that like trying out meals, I would always say, again, try to have some go-tos, some favorites, some easy ones that you can slot in there. And then again, if it's something you enjoy, picking a few days to try some new recipes, maybe more involved recipes when you have time. But the great thing is you can start to add to your favorites and your go-tos. Some may be flops, but again, if you can expand your repertoire of easy go-tos, that's always a good thing also. Again, building in leftovers days, building in days to eat out, knowing kind of what your week looks like and being realistic with that and how much help that maybe you have in that area. Again, if it's applicable to you, involving family members and selections, right? So I know in my house, I do a lot of the shopping and a lot of the cooking, but if I can engage a child in what they want, often then they feel like they're contributing. They're more likely to try a meal if they're helping either pick it and or prep it. So again, if it makes sense for you in, expanding beyond just yourself, giving everyone maybe a day to pick a meal, depending on ages. Couple other just thoughts maybe to make that a little bit easier is some people will do theme days, right? Meatless Monday, Taco Tuesday, Pasta Wednesday. If that helps in terms of brainstorming ideas or makes making meal plans a little less daunting, that is an option. As I mentioned, if you are going to cook at home, pick meals, write down those ingredients, right? Maybe you're planning around what's on sale. I keep talking about the cost of food, or maybe you're talking about ingredients you already have or that are in your pantry or in your freezer. Make sure you're also writing down snacks and meals, keeping track of those as the week goes on. So when you go to make that list, you've got all of that laid out and it's just transferring it onto your list. A couple other tips in terms of making life a little bit easier. I will often, if it makes sense for a person or family sake, is there things you can do right when you get back? So chopping veggies, right? Throw them in an airtight container, maybe a paper towel to absorb some moisture. And as the week goes on and you want to make a salad for dinner, right? You're grabbing veggies that are already cut up and you're throwing it on versus having to chop up everything at that time. So in the big scheme of things, that usually ends up saving people time. And then again, if it makes sense for you and your family, spending a little bit of time meal prepping each week, and that might be breakfast burritos, it might be energy bites, it might be overnight oats. I have some examples down here, but is there things that you can do maybe on the weekend to set yourself up to be successful during the week? And again, spending a little bit of time in terms of meal prep one day will save you time the rest of the week. And again, hopefully make you be more successful as well. Okay, so again, kind of a lot of different ideas and thoughts around actually cooking food and meal planning. Any comments or questions on any of that? Okay, so I threw out, this is maybe just an example, right, of what a grocery list might look like if you're doing it on paper, or you could even do this on your phone. These are the meals that we're doing. So you have those written out, and then you can fill in the different areas with the ingredients that you're going to need in addition to just your staples for the week. So again, going to the grocery store with a list and with a plan usually will turn out better for most people. So just an example of what that might look like. Okay. I also want to give you guys a few resources with this, right? So again, if you're like, yeah, I wish I could cook more, but I have trouble thinking of what to make, or yeah, I would like to do some meal prepping to make my life easier during the week. These are some examples of things that might help. Once a month meals, as the name implies, you will spend a good chunk of maybe one weekend a month cooking and prepping, and then freezing meals that you could just dump in a crock pot, right? To make your life easier during the week. Plan to eat, meal board, Yumly, a lot, Meal Planner Pro, a lot of these will generate meal ideas for you and an associated grocery list so that you make sure you're getting all those ingredients. If you are someone that just wants different ideas in terms of meals, I threw out a couple websites and or cookbooks, maybe some new places to look in terms of recipes. Again, there are so many out there. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but I think these are some fun ones that I'll share recipes from. And then we're getting into, I actually love in the fall, the winter, right? Crock pots, Instapots, can make life easier, kind of dump things in, let them cook all day. And I feel like fall and winter, soups and stews and chilies and a lot of things like that. There's a lot of great recipes that I think are more fall and winter oriented. So maybe time to pull those back out for most of us and start using those as a tool as well. Okay. Not everyone likes to cook. Some people don't cook at all. Or sometimes, we're eating out for pleasure, for company, for work-related events. And so I wanted to maybe give some tips and things to think about around that eating out. So, one thing that struck me as I was working on this is reading that on average, we consume about additional 200 calories when we eat a meal out versus say we eat at home or pack it ourselves. So if you're eating out 2 days a week, which is not excessive, I don't think, that could essentially lead to an additional intake of about 20,000 calories or about 6 pounds a year if we don't compensate in another way. Okay. So again, 2 days a week is really not that much, but where do those extra calories come from when we're eating out? They can come from a lot of places. So things I would say to think about is, if the opportunity presents itself, looking at a menu ahead of time, right? When we walk into a restaurant and we're starving and our eyes are bigger than our stomach, we might make a different choice than if we had looked ahead and said, these might be good choices. If there's an option, right? If you find yourself eating out and there's an option to customize, right? So I put a few examples here, right? Maybe lunch places, you might grab something can I do half the sauce at Cafe Yum? Or can I choose whether I'm putting cheese or extra meat, or how many veggies I'm putting on there at Subway, right? We can make decisions that fit us. Portion size is a big thing when we're eating out. So generally portions tend to be bigger at restaurants when we eat out, except the really the fancy restaurants where they're really expensive and you get an appropriate portion of food, but it feels like you're getting chips, because normally when we eat out, right, meals are very big. So ways to manage maybe portion size, if you're with someone and it makes sense, can you share an entree? Or can you take half of it to go? And I'll tell people, even get, as your meal's delivered, ask for that to go box and put half of it away right from the start, right? Can you change your order to get half your plate with veggies? Can you add a salad, right? And so filling up with these more fibrous, volume filling foods, that can help with the portion size as well. Being aware of sauces, I mentioned Cafe Yum, half the sauce, dressings, right, on our salads, asking it for it to be light or on the side so you can control how much that is. The bread basket and the chip basket, right? How many of us, I know I'm in this category, right? We go out to, say, Mexican, and they bring out the chips and we eat the chips, and then they bring out more chips, and then they bring out more chips. And then by the time your meal gets there, you're like, oh, kind of full. Or you eat your meal anyway, even though you consumed all these chips, right? Same thing with the bread basket. So do you skip those? Do you stop at one refill? But again, be aware of you walking in hungry and this is sitting on the table. Are you going to overdo it on that instead of your meal? Make sure you speak up for yourself. Again, it's usually possible to substitute. Eating slowly, or the 20-minute rule. I think this one's interesting because most people, we are not taking 20 minutes to eat a meal, right? And that's reality. So it does take, though, 20 minutes from the time you start eating to get food into your stomach and for the hormones or signals to get sent up to your brain that says, hey, I've got food in here. I'm not starving anymore. Now, again, when we're eating really quickly, we're not allowing our body to catch up and to listen to that. And so, we might start eating lunch at 12:45 and we're done at 12:52 and I'm still hungry. Am I really still hungry, or have I not given my body time to catch up? So can I wait till 1:05 and ask myself, am I really still hungry? Okay. And the answer might be yes. It might be I'm not, but man, that food tasted good and I want more. Or it might be, you know what, I'm actually content and I'm in a good spot. But we're allowing ourselves to really listen to our body instead of overruling it before it has time to catch up. Okay, lastly on this one, fluids, right? We talked about the importance and the amount of fluid we're supposed to consume in a day. Trying to drink water around meals, right? If we are dehydrated, we can mistake thirst for hunger, right? So we might think we're hungry, but really what we need to be doing is drinking more. And then the other side of that is being aware of alcohol intake and how that affects your choices, right? So we talked about protein and carbohydrates having 4 calories per gram and fat having 9. Alcohol falls in the middle at 7, but we're not going to use this for energy like we use those other macronutrients. We're going to store this energy and we're going to store it as fat. The other thing to think about is, maybe we would stop at half a meal, or maybe we wouldn't get dessert, or we'd stop at the one basket of chips. But after a drink or two, our decision making is altered, right? And so we might do some of these things that we might not do without that alcohol intake. So again, not to say to never drink, but just to think about how do you function with that alcohol, and how does that affect things depending on what your goals are. Okay, questions on that, comments, other suggestions for people that I may not have thought of?
I do eat way too fast.
Yeah.
I'll confess. And, beyond the mind and body not catching up with you, I mean, are there other kind of implications of eating too fast, like digestively or anything like that?
That's a good question. I think, if for some reason your like transient time is altered, that could be an issue. But I think, if you're consuming an appropriate amount and just doing it quickly and then being done, that doesn't, again, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think, again, the bigger concern, I think, is again, we will maybe eat more than we should, thinking we're still hungry, right? So, but again, you're not alone in that. Very rarely when I ask how many people take 20 minutes or more to eat I mean, like 1 out of 100. It's very rare. And again, I think that's a product of probably just the society we lived in and we live in, and we're quick paced, right? And we just don't have that much time. So it's common. And again, the goal I think would be just to bring some awareness to that and understanding of how our body functions with that speed.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome.
My wife is good to remind me of that.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, again, maybe another option, right? So, all right, I don't love to cook. Oh, maybe I shouldn't eat out as much. What are my other options? And so I do like to just point out this, again, not an exhaustive list, but lots of options. And some of these are local to the Portland area, but meal delivery. And this can be done a few different ways, right? This might be getting the meal boxes delivered to you. And I always say, you know, the nice part about that is sometimes you're not, okay, like, oh, that sounds good, and I can order that and we can make that. And everything's portioned out, and I don't have to worry about picking up groceries for that. The flip side is you are still cooking it, right? And that can still be time consuming. So again, great for some, not great for others. Some people want something that's already made and delivered, and they just have to warm it up or pull it out of the fridge. And so there are some options here as well. Daily Harvest, Trifecta, Stella's Kitchen, Thistle is another one that's not listed. Farm to Fit, My Fit Foods, again, lots of options, some of these being more local to Portland. But again, there is options for everyone. And a lot of times maybe we're overlapping one or two or more of these categories to make it work for us. Okay, the last
question, Michelle.
Oh, absolutely.
Just on the previous slide.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on the kind of the nutritional quality of like, you know, we've used HelloFresh and Green Chef. Some of those meals seem pretty high in calories, but you know, all the ingredients are good. I mean, you know, there's raw foods that you get that you cook up and stuff.
Yeah, one thing I'm conscious of, the bigger thing I'd say I'm conscious of in some of these is like the sauces and maybe the sodium content. You know, in terms of, like you said, calorie or energy density, you know, again, when you're picking out those meals, that's something that you can look at. And then you can also look at, you know, do we make this, maybe it's designed for 2, but it is a more energy dense, and that's not what we need. So maybe we split it into 3 and it makes a lunch for somebody. So I think you can, again, if the meal sounds like it tastes good and that's something you want, you could play more with portion size versus, you know, feeling like you can't have that. And I'd say that probably across the board. Again, the sodium content is one that I'm more aware of with some of these, and some of the sauces and things like that. You know, you're in a little less control on that side of things.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to touch, and I skipped ahead here, so this might have popped up. So some of you saw this, but I want to talk a little bit on habits, right? And so now that I've skipped ahead, you'll see this, but you know, for a long time, I know I heard, you know, 21 days to form a habit, right? 3 weeks. And there was a study out of the UK, and it's been a few years now, but they showed that actually the average amount of time to form a habit was 66 days, which is like 3 times as long as I thought, right? So we're not talking 3 weeks, we're talking like 9. There are some factors that, you know, contribute to this length, because this was the average, and some people it was more and some people it was less. So thinking about when we're trying to form a habit, right? Because again, going back to this idea of diet being the way that we eat and something that we can sustain and do for a long time. So we're forming habits in the way that we eat, right? Instead of these short-term quick fixes. So how complex a habit is that we want to form or we want to change. Okay, so an example, we talked about these documentaries. I had a high school cross-country runner come in, and you know, we'd kind of gone through what her normal intake was, no real fruits and vegetables. So I'm kind of got that in my mind as something maybe we talk about. And then, you know, the mom says, well, her and her dad watched Game Changers last night, and they're going to try going vegan. And I'm over here going, wait, we're not eating fruits and vegetables, but we're going to go vegan. Seemed like a really big change, right? So when we talk about habit complexity, the harder the change, the bigger the change, the longer it's going to take to form that habit. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but keeping in mind, it's going to take longer to form a habit. Consistency, right? So this is a big one too. I find a lot of us are kind of programmed to think all or none, right? Really common. So I'm in or I'm out. I'm on the diet or I'm not on the diet. I'm on track or I'm giving up. And this one I think is key, because yes, the more consistent we are, especially earlier on when we're trying to form a habit, the more quickly we will form that habit. However, it doesn't mean that you need to be perfect. Okay. So it's okay to have an off day and jump back on, right? My habit is I'm trying to eat breakfast every day and I missed yesterday. Well, you're not starting back at square one, right? You missed a day and we jump back in and try and continue to make that habit as consistent as possible. Also starting new versus getting rid of the old, right? So again, I had mentioned, sometimes if we say I can never have fill in the blank, we're thinking about fill in the blank, right? That's what we want to have. Instead of thinking, all right, I'm going to try and add this or do this. So instead of thinking, I'm never eating dessert again, maybe we think, okay, I want to make sure I have 3 servings of vegetables a day, and I want to make sure I have those before I have dessert, right? So we're adding in new habits versus saying, I can't do this anymore, right? And it won't always apply, but again, we will have a tendency to form those habits more quickly when we're kind of in that mindset. Okay. Questions, thoughts?
Michelle, this is off topic and thank you for everything.
Yeah.
I just jumped in. I'm with Insperity, and the first thing I thought was when I hear food and athletes is inflammation. Did you already talk about that?
A little bit, and that's a great question. So we talked a little bit about, omega-3 fatty acids, right? Which are foods like
Yep.
fish and avocados and nuts and seeds and olive oils and things like that, and how that really can help actually with inflammation, and is something that I would say generally maybe most people don't get enough of. So
What
I think
about
that
supplements if you can't get the fish oils?
yeah, we have not touched on supplements. So that's a great question. I would say for the most part, I'm always going to tell people, can we get things through food? That's going to be our first line. Now, there may be someone that's like, I cannot eat fish. And I said that was a really good source of omega-3 fatty acids. But I could take a fish oil, right? So again, depending on the person and depending on the situation, can we use supplements, as the name implies, right, to supplement our diet versus to rely on them instead of making the effort with diet? Again, just a slight kind of change in how we're thinking about it. But certainly there are times where things like a fish oil, right, that's going to help us get that omega-3 in, curcumin or tart cherry juice. There are things when you speak, inflammation, that, if you're in a situation where that's important, there are different things that we can look at depending on the situation. So again, I'll encourage people to do food first when we can. But the same thing, we live up here in the Northwest, and I'm also telling almost everybody to take a vitamin D supplement over the winter because it's hard to get enough of it through food. So there are definitely times where it's beneficial or needed for sure.
Thanks for that. My last quick question is,
Yeah.
how does inflammation impact the anatomy?
Well, there's a few different ways. And again, it depends on kind of the extent of it. Increased inflammation can potentially lead to plaque buildup. It can lead to, when we think about our extremities or arthritis, again, depending on kind of your genetics, and inflammation in certain areas can lead to soreness of limbs. For certain people, it can lead to extra fatigue. So there's a lot of different, I think, body systems that it can affect. Of course, it depends on your anatomy, your genetics, and other lifestyle factors, and kind of how that goes into it. There are situations where inflammation is not always bad, right? When we have an injury and we want more blood flow to that area, we will naturally have some inflammation, and that for a short period of time is not a bad thing. When we have a cut or something like that, right, we get more blood flow to that area, maybe some inflammation. So there are times where our body, is trying to fight something off and there may be more inflammation. So times where it's not always bad, but times where, we'd like to kind of minimize that as well.
Thanks, Michelle.
Absolutely. And this is actually my last slide. So if anyone has other questions, we'll definitely have lots of time for that. We talked a little bit about these habits. And I guess my thought with this and this slide was, all right, well, if we decide we want to change a habit, right, how do we actually make a plan to do that? So I gave an example here of increasing our fluid intake. And I mentioned a few things when we were talking about fluid intake, right? Carrying a water bottle with you, setting an alarm, putting something by your nightstand. Sometimes we'll say, having a cup of tea, in the evening. But here's my habit that I want to change. Here's my goal. Well, what's my plan to actually do that, right? If my goal is I want to exercise, more often. Okay, well, what does more often mean? Is that walking twice a week? Great. What days are you doing that? Are you planning that in your schedule versus it gets to be Sunday and, oh, I haven't done any exercise, right? So making a plan, having related to your goals or your habits that you want to change. And so focusing on one, forming a new habit, and then we can focus on another new habit to change. And so we can build on these positive changes, whether we're talking about diet or exercise or other health things as well. Okay. So we've already had some amazing questions and we have time for more. If there's anything I didn't address or was unclear or want more depth, to go more depth about. Anyone else have questions or comments?
Well, Michelle, this is Steve again. I would love to ask you just your thoughts on fasting and, how it can help us just from a nutrition or diet standpoint. And I realize with fasting, that too is not an all or nothing thing. I mean, there are different types of fasts, I guess, but I'm not very knowledgeable about the whole process of fasting, although I probably do it more than I realize. But maybe you could share some thoughts on how that can help us.
Yeah. And so again, this is one of intermittent fasting, as example, where we're very purposeful about that. And so, for example, intermittent fasting will start and move towards, getting to the point where maybe you're eating for 6 or 8 hours out of the day, right? And so that might be, I start eating at noon and I'm done by 6 or noon to 7. And again, some people do really well with that. Some people feel better energy wise. They find that they can control their intake better, right? There's only so much we can eat in that short period of time. If we're losing weight, again, blood sugar, cholesterol, there are a lot of reasons that we can benefit from that. And again, I've talked to some people that just feel great doing it. The caveat or the things I would caution about that is if it's specifically related to weight loss, I do find females tend not to have as much benefit from that as males, again, specific to weight loss. Hormonally, we are built differently and we tend to hold on to more of that. So I'll get the husband and wife and, they're both doing it and the husband's lost 20 pounds and the wife has lost 2, right? We as females are more inclined hormonally to hold on to that. The other thing to think about is, if there's any kind of history of disordered eating or struggles with our food relationship with food, it probably isn't one I would recommend to someone, right? Because it is pretty restrictive. And for some people, that's not the best path to go down. So that would be something else that I would just caution people to be aware of related to the fasting. But again, some people feel really good doing it and some people don't. So it's something where it's not just a good or just a bad thing. I would say, is it something that's sustainable for you? Is it a way that you can, eat pretty consistently and do you feel good doing it? Great.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Well, I'll ask you one more, Michelle.
Absolutely.
If you don't mind. and you've already spoken to it, and it was the documentary called The Game Changers. So as with your other client, and it sounds like a good mix of animal-based protein and so on. It's good for the diet in general, is one of my takeaways from your remarks. You don't have to go straight vegan to necessarily get the health benefits that I think the documentary was suggesting.
Right. And yes. So again, a big part is where are we starting? And that's not to say that, I think looking at the why behind, say, wanting to go plant-based, and, for some people it's environmental or ethical, and there are lots of reasons. And absolutely, can we get what we need eating a plant-based diet? We can. I think we have to be more aware of certain, like our protein and our zinc and our iron and our overall energy intake. So there are things to be aware of, but we can meet our needs. Is it necessary to go plant-based to be healthy or to get all those health benefits? I would argue that that's not necessarily true. And so, maybe incorporating some plant-based meals right throughout the week, right? Without feeling like you have to go 100% vegan. Or again, if you're someone that eats fast food, twice a day, every day, maybe you start cooking meals at home and you're going to get a lot of health benefits from that. So it's not to say that there aren't a lot of health benefits that can come from eating plant-based. But I would say we can still be healthy and have a healthy diet without having to go 100% plant-based. So, again, that's that all or none mentality. And there's definitely an in-between with that. And if we do go plant-based and don't do it in the right way, and we aren't conscious of some of these nutrients, that can actually be detrimental to your health and your goals as well. So it's something that has to be a little bit more thought out, and some awareness that goes with it as well.
Great, thanks. Sorry, I'll fire one more at you if
Absolutely.
you don't mind. Could you comment on the just whey protein versus animal protein, just kind of the effectiveness there? Because I do both, but I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so there are a few different types. So whey and casein are the two types of proteins we find in dairy. So those would be similar to other other animal proteins. Those are complete proteins. Again, depending what our goal is, right? When we're talking about protein powder. So, whey and other animal-based proteins are high or in leucine, which is a rate limiting amino acid when we talk about muscle building and repair and tissue repair. So a really good concentrated source of that leucine, fast acting, complete amino acid profile. Plant-based protein on the other side, again, for maybe someone that doesn't react well to a dairy protein, or that doesn't do any animal products. There are several different plant-based proteins. Often you want to get a plant-based protein that maybe has a few sources of that protein, because we want that amino acid profile to be complemented. So again, talking about complete proteins that are animal proteins, as well as soy and quinoa, are plant-based proteins. Outside of those two are incomplete proteins. And so we need to eat those in a combination to create this complementary amino acid profile. So with the plant-based protein powders, depending on the one, sometimes we have to go a little bit higher. You might have to do more like 30 grams to get that complete amino acid profile. Some are supplemented with additional amino acids, so you can get the correct amino acid profile in the one scoop, which is usually closer to 20 grams. So those kinds of factors also play in. There's so many protein powders out there, but again, the contents of that protein powder will play into that as well, and that amino acid profile. But generally, animal-based and that whey protein, complete protein, full amino acid profile. So it's a great option for a lot of people. Again, for those that don't want it, there are definitely options that can be used that don't have that animal protein as well. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Any other questions? This has been great. All right. Well, as we said, we are recording this, and so this will be available, but I appreciate you guys being here and participating, asking some wonderful questions and, sharing this time with us. So thank you for joining.
Thanks so much, Michelle. Very helpful.